one of my children, dysregulation, the emotional dysregulation continued throughout and into the elementary school years. There was a lot of trying and trial and error. We would try different things and then it wouldn't necessarily work or it would work for a short time. And so while it took a little bit longer than I probably would have liked, I will say that we were successful in the end. And so that allows me to then really encourage other families and children today that it's all possible.
Meltdowns, screen battles, homework struggles sound familiar? Step Inside Your Child's Mind is a series from Brain Futures where child development experts tackle real parenting challenges. You'll unlock the brain skills behind your child's learning, behavior, and emotions, blending expert insight with real life experiences and a dose of humor. You'll get practical strategies you can use right away to support your child's success every day. This is Step Inside Your Child's Mind. I'm Kadena Williams, Project Manager with Brain Futures Youth Executive Function Program. I have the pleasure of speaking with Joyce King. She is the Clinical Director, Mental Health Therapist, Certified Addictions Counselor, 16-year U.S. Air Force veteran, a dedicated wife and mother of two. Welcome, Joyce.
Hi, how are you doing, Kadena?
Great. So talk to us a little bit about your work with children and families and tell us some of the concerns that parents come to you for help.
I see children from 5 to 17 years old, and oftentimes they present with attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, which is ADHD. They will also present with oppositional defiance disorder or ODD. And then I see children who are on the autism spectrum. There are co-occurring disorders that oftentimes accompany those three, which can be depression, a mood disorder, or anxiety.
So you mentioned anxiety, you mentioned depression, all are related to our feelings and emotion. And so today we're talking about emotional regulation. For the parent who's still understanding what that is, can you define emotional regulation in its very simplest term?
Emotional regulation describes our ability to experience difficult or intense emotions and not allow or let those emotions then impact our behaviors in a negative way.
Okay. And so, in terms of managing those emotions and understanding what those emotions are, walk us through what is happening in the brain of a child when they lose control of their emotion.
When we see a child who is having maybe a meltdown of some sorts or experiencing very, very intense emotions, then we know that that child is kind of in their midbrain area. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for reasoning and judgment and self-control, emotional self-control. That's the last part of the brain to actually develop. And so for a young child, we know that that prefrontal cortex is very underdeveloped in that moment. And so what they're feeling in that moment is just really, really intense emotions, and they're not sure exactly what to do with them. But they know how to tell us through their behaviors that they're not happy.
And so kids are born with all of the feelings and emotions and not the skills to manage them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so we reached out to Baltimore County Public School parents in elementary schools, and we actually got a lot of questions from our parents on this topic of emotional regulation. One question that I wanted to share with you is emotional regulation innate or is it a product of our environment?
I think that there are parts and components that are innate because they're attached or attributed to our personalities. By and large, I think most of professionals would agree that it's really learned behaviors. It's picked up from the environment. And it really begins at home and it kind of just expands out depending on the child's involvement in society.
Okay. And are there routines or environmental factors that influence a child's inability to manage their emotions or can improve their ability to manage their emotions for that matter?
Yeah. So at home, as parents, we're our children's primary teacher and first teacher. Therefore, we start by modeling the behavior that we want them to learn, and we want them to mirror. And so I, as a parent, have to approach my child who may be experiencing a meltdown in a very calm demeanor and in a calm way so that, number one, I'm not adding fuel to the fire, so to speak. But then also, it allows me to make sure that I'm able to exercise good reasoning and good judgment by maintaining and controlling my own emotions. and then I can attend to whatever their need is.
It sounds easier said than done because oftentimes, you're in the grocery store and as a parent, you're trying to multitask and trying to get everything done. And, your little one wants a candy and you say no. And, they're not able to process that direction. And so they have an outburst in the grocery store. And so, it's hard for parents to maintain composure in that moment. What are some strategies parents can use to help self-regulate for themselves so that they can model that behavior for their kids?
I start off by telling parents the first step is going to be prevention. So we're going to know our child, we're going to know what their triggers are. And so if going to the grocery store or to a big box retail store is going to be too much stimulation for the child, then number one, let's see if we can avoid taking the child to the store. But if on those off chances you're out and about and you really just need to run in real quickly and then, grab something, then, you want to determine exactly what's going to allow that child not to be tempted or not to be overstimulated or distracted by the noises, sounds, the toys, the candies, and everything else. And so oftentimes it might mean bringing something that's going to distract them. So their favorite toy or favorite game or something of that nature. Not always possible because you don't want to be accused of, maybe taking it, from the store or whatever, but it's going to be important that we prevent the meltdowns and we try to get ahead of them if at all possible. All efforts fail, right? And our child goes ahead and they have their meltdown in the store, then we want to stop and we want to really get on their level and attend to them. Tune out the the peering eyes, all the other folks looking around or whatever, and the social judgments and implications, because that's the part that gets the parents a little riled up themselves because we're worried about what other people are going to think about us or think about our parenting skills or about our child. And so we have to be able to tune all of that out and just really hone in on what's happening with the child in that moment and help them to self-soothe and calm as quickly as possible. And that might mean I'm leaving my cart here and I'm leaving the store in that moment.
What are some signs parents can watch for at home that will indicate that, my child is struggling to regulate their emotions and start building on some of those skills?
Yeah, I think at home is the best environment to really begin to pay attention to our children. So if we start to notice that they have this inability to accept the word no or to accept boundaries and limitations, bedtime is 8 o'clock. And so when we notice that every time at 8 o'clock we're saying, okay, it's time to go to bed, they're pushing back, they're resisting, they're becoming more defiant. It's normal for kids to try and maneuver their way around and avoid doing it. That's normal. But when we get to a point where, again, we're having all these explosions or these very, very strong displays of emotions, these intense emotions, and it's happening regularly, in our efforts to try to curtail it or to redirect, to set some limits and some boundaries, if I give you a hug and that's not enough, I'm not able to reassure you, then as a parent, we want to make sure we want to start kind of paying a little bit more attention to that and maybe thinking that there may be a little bit more going on and the child may need some additional supports.
So we know that parenting is not done in silo. And so the home is in one environment. And so kids leave the home and they're exposed to so many different things within their environment, school, other peers that they interact with. So with the wider community, how can the wider community actually influence a child's ability to develop self-regulation skills?
Yeah, absolutely. So the child is going to, again, begin to learn some of these skills at home, but they do go into the community, whether it be going to school, whether it be enjoying sports leagues, whether it be going to church, joining the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, or whatever the case may be. So it is going to be important that the wider community also understands when a parent needs some additional support and when they don't. And then also kind of eh, helping to set boundaries and limitations for the child. If it's consistently done across their spectrum and across the environments that the child is in, then it increases the likelihood that they're going to pick up those skills that they need a lot faster, and they'll adjust and adapt.
So we talked about the fact that emotional regulation is a skill that both parents and children need to learn over time. And so what are some coping strategies that parents can start using today to help their children manage their emotions when they're having those outbursts or when they're feeling overwhelmed?
Yeah, there lots of strategies and coping skills are available to parents and to children. One of my favorites, and one that I've oftentimes utilized in the therapy session with both the child and the parent, is belly breathing or deep breathing and say it. And so I work with them on practicing that skill when there is no emotional dysregulation, when things are calm, there's no issues, there's no difficulties to overcome, because it's in that moment that we really want to help teach the skill before they need the skill, right? And so in the setting or in the therapy session, we'll sit down and we'll put our feet on the ground. And then, I will encourage them to mimic what I'm doing, which is to inhale through my nose to the count of 5. I hold it for a brief moment, and then I release or exhale through my mouth to a count of 4. And we want to begin to teach the children that skill so that they can then learn how to regulate their own emotions and then begin to self-soothe and calm on their own. We teach the parents in the session so that they can then begin to consistently practice that skill while at home. And if there is a emotionally dysregulated moment and opportunity at home, they can then begin to help encourage the child to utilize that particular skill.
I feel so much more relaxed and at
Yeah,
ease. And so just letting out the emotions, letting out the feeling, I'm sure is really helpful for children.
absolutely. Yeah. And then just really, again, understanding that they actually have the ability to exercise some control over it is reassuring and comforting to a child as well.
How early can parents start to practice some of those skills with their children?
Very early. I mean, infants, a 10-month-old can begin to recognize our cues and pay attention, to what's going on with the parents. But generally, once you get to the toddler age, you really, really want to be very intentional and deliberate about teaching those skills, especially when we start to get to our terrible twos and our trying threes. It's a natural order. It's a rite of passage. Every parent has to go through it. But this is the part where we really begin to teach some of those skills that they're going to then take in the preschool years and then on in the subsequent years following.
And so, would you mind sharing a little bit about your personal parenting experience helping your children develop self regulation skills?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had the pleasure of parenting two children through the terrible twos and trying threes. It was a very interesting experience. For my first child, got everything wrong, like every other parent, just because I didn't know. Before having children, I remember looking at witnessing or observing kids in the store, and like most people. Oh, that won't happen. I will make sure that my child does it. That did not happen, okay? So we navigated the terrible twos and the trying threes, but then, for one of my children, it kind of continued. The dysregulation, the emotional dysregulation continued throughout and into the elementary school years. And so that really required my husband and I to hone in on some different parenting skills and strategies to meet that particular child's needs in that moment. And so there was a lot of trying and trial and error, but we would try different things and then it wouldn't necessarily work or it would work for a short time. And then we would have to then try something different. And so I was working in the field, so it was great. So I had the opportunity to really talk with a lot of my colleagues about some different strategies. But then we also brought in other professionals as well to assist us in that process. And so while it took a little bit longer than I probably would have liked, I will say that we were successful in the end and everything is all as well. And so that allows me to then really encourage other families and children today that it's all possible. Your child won't always be 2, 5, or 10 years old. They're going to grow up, their brain is going to continue to develop. And so we just need to make sure that we are assisting them in each of those stages of development and supporting them in the process, no matter how difficult it is.
Yeah, it sounds easier said than done.
Yes, easier said than done, but it's definitely doable and it's achievable.
Talk to us about mom guilt. I know parents, we want perfect kids. We want our kids to grow up and everything to be fine. And so When you were going through that process with your children, did you experience any guilt or even blaming, like maybe I did something wrong?
Absolutely. Again, in my mind, I felt like I was prepared and I was ready. But then until you actually step into that role or you start to experience those challenges, you really don't know. You can't know how ready you are. You really can't get ready until that moment. But absolutely, I felt guilt and did not help that I was receiving a lot of opinions, different judgments from family, from friends, from the community, from teachers, from principals and whatnot. And so I really had to work on tuning all of that out and just focusing on my child and making sure that I'm able to meet their needs in that moment. Because if I started to think about the guilt, place blame or point fingers, then I would begin to respond, to my child in that way or from that place. And that's not helpful at all. And so I really had to develop some thick skin, so to speak. And then finally, and lastly, it was I know that I love my child and I want what's best for the both of them, and so therefore I really came and I was very intentional about coming from a place of love when dealing with them. And so therefore I kind of felt like no matter what the outcome was going to be, I didn't have the need to feel guilty because I did my best.
Right, right. Yeah. And what I hear from you is also you utilizing self-regulation skills in those moments. So you had to, work on you so that you were able to show up and display the right behaviors and emotions for your children when they were going through their emotional ups and downs.
Yeah, absolutely. And thankfully, I had a partner. My husband was there. Um, did not work in this field. He does not work in this field or whatever. So I had to teach him some skills so that he can then learn to adapt them as well. And we were able to kind of tag in and out. If I was exhausted, if I had a very long day at work or a tiresome day or it's just difficult, I could say to him, "Hey, I need you to get the child at this point." Some folks don't necessarily have that luxury. And so therefore, this is where the village is going to come in. So if you have extended family members or if you have good friends, and we had that as well. We were military, so we weren't in close proximity to any extended family members. And so we really had to develop those relationships with individuals within the community. And so we did. We had a great social support network where if both of us were exhausted or drained or we just needed a break, there were a couple of folks that we could say, "Hey, can you grab them?" And, give us a day or two. And so that was really, really helpful for us to be able to get a little bit of respite.
How do parents set boundaries with their children while also understanding that their brain is developing? So, we talked about skill, and the kids are born with all of these feelings. And so, it's our responsibility as parents to teach them the skills. And so, we've gotten to that point where we're implementing these skills, we're exercising the breathing and healthy communication, but how do parents set boundaries for their children and just being flexible with understanding they're still learning and their brains are still developing and understanding how to
Right.
regulate?
Right. I think it's important too for parents to start with the place and the foundation of kids thrive on discipline, consistency, and predictability. And so, if as much as possible, it's important for us to be able to provide a routine for our children, especially young children, where they don't necessarily have to think a whole lot. They kind of know it becomes automatic. They know that every day there's certain things happen. And so when you have a child that's struggling with emotional regulation, it's even more important to provide that consistency, that structure. Also, when we're setting boundaries, if I say I'm going to do something as a parent, if I say, "Hey, if you um, get up in the morning and go ahead and brush your teeth and put your shoes on or whatever it is what task that we're asking them to do, then you can then earn a toy or a treat or time on the computer or whatever the case may be." I need to make sure that I'm able to follow through with said promise or reward that they're going to earn. Even if life happens, and life happens to all of us, I need to make sure that the child is too young to fully understand that, "Oh, I can't do this right now because there is a barrier." So we have to make sure that we're following through on the things that we say, whether it be they're earning something or whether it be the consequences of them failing to do what it is that we're asking them to do. And so oftentimes, you generally have a parent who is bleeding heart and just like, oh, I love them so much. They're so cute and they're so adorable and everything. And they kind of allow those boundaries to be blurred a little bit. We need to understand as parents what we're doing and what we're teaching our child when we allow those boundaries to be blurred. We're thinking that we're helping them and we're thinking that we're showing love, but in actuality, we're teaching them that mom's boundaries are a little fickle. And so if I push hard enough, if I respond in a way that is extreme or intense or loud, then she'll give in.
We talked about boundaries just now. And so, how should parents really respond in that meltdown situation or that school drop off, and the kid is just having a meltdown and you have to get to work or you have to get stuff done? How do parents implement the coping skills while also really understanding to set the boundaries and knowing that, okay, my child brain is still developing, kind of wrap it all together for us?
Yeah. Um, I think again, the most important thing is going to be to slow things down in that time frame. Yes, I have to get to work. Yes, they need to get to school at a particular time, but it's going to be important to slow things down. I think it's important and also for parents to be able to give names and labels to those emotions and feelings because kids don't necessarily know. They're just feeling the feelings. They don't understand that I'm really mad right now. And anger may be secondary or whatever, but I'm really mad because I'm disappointed. I didn't get what I want. Or I'm hungry or I'm tired, I'm bored, or whatever the case may be. Kids can't necessarily articulate that. And so it's going to be important for parents to be able to recognize, okay, so let me do a quick check-in, with the child and determine, okay, did I feed them? Are they bored right now? Did they get enough rest? Did they get enough sleep? Are they feeling anxious? Because sometimes anxiety, we can see a lot of the kind of responses from the behavioral responses from kids when they're feeling really anxious, but they can't really tell us that they're feeling because they can't necessarily articulate that. So slowing things down in that moment, helping them to calm themselves, reassuring them that things are going to be well. When it comes to the drop off or school, this is a great opportunity for parents to really connect with the teachers and the school systems to partner together so that if in order for me to drop, child off, to you, please, be there to receive him or her, and so having that partnership and that connection is definitely going to be paramount for parents as well.
I'm happy you mentioned school and parents working with the schools. How can parents and the school collaborate to support children while they're in the school and they may be struggling with regulating their emotions?
Yeah, I think it's going to be important that when parents see or when the teachers begin to see a behavior, a pattern of behaviors, then that's when they're going to immediately start to connect and to talk to each other about what's working at school versus what's working at home versus what's not working in either of those locations in either of those settings. Having that partnership and that collaboration when at all possible, mirroring the same types of interventions or behavioral modification strategies or reward systems can also help children to better regulate their emotions and be more successful in both environments. If a child sees that, okay, both mom and teacher or mom and principal are, or dad as well, are working together to assist me, to help me, then they'll probably feel less like something's wrong with them or that they're bad or, have those kind of self kind of condemning thoughts and feelings.
They can also reach out to the school counselors, and there's also a lot of support in BCPS's public schools for parents. So, talk to us about specific activities or programs that is available for children who are struggling with emotional regulation skills.
So, yeah, depending on their age, the younger the children are, those resources will be very limited because they're very specialized and everything. But if you're talking about a 2-year old, 3-year old, 4-year old, then you want to start with a pediatrician and really look at, what are the expected milestones that they're targeting or that they should be hitting. But then you could also begin to look at early intervention programs that are offered through the counties, as well through the Department of Behavioral Health. or the local behavioral health authority or even social services. Those are great options. And then understanding that for our school age children, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act provides a plethora of resources and processes, interventions that families can tap into in order to then get that additional supports in the school environment as well. And then as they get older, you can then come to a behavioral health professional. So, like myself, a therapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist if medication is warranted.
And are there specific organizations locally that support the entire family?
Yeah, so NAMI or the National Alliance Mental Illness have programs throughout each county and in every state throughout the United States, and definitely within Maryland for sure. So there are support groups and support programs that parents can tap into, they can sign up for. The Maryland Family Network is also available. They have multiple locations throughout multiple counties in the state, and they offer parenting classes and different resources to assist families.
And for a parent, a mom, or a dad who might be listening and they are going through it right now, they're trying to figure it out and navigate supporting their child who's struggling to regulate and manage his or her emotion. What's one advice you would provide to that parent who's listening?
I would definitely tell them to stay encouraged. So again, it won't always be like this. So be mindful of themselves, be in the moment, take each day, sometimes each hour, depending on the child and how strong, how intense their emotional dysregulation is, and what other organic things may be going on in their brains. So just educate themselves as much as possible and then get the advice of the professionals as quickly and as early as possible. And then resist the urge to blame, right? Resist the urge to have those guilty feelings come up. And then lastly, self care. Self care is going to be so important because if we don't take care of ourselves, then we're definitely not able to care for our child and meet our child's needs.
Thank you so much. Those are really, really good advice. This was a great conversation. I learned so much. Thank you so much, Joyce. Thank you for listening. Please join us for our third conversation focused on managing screen time. This conversation series is produced by Brain Futures, a mental health nonprofit advancing innovation by bridging the gap between research and practice. This series is made possible through the generous support of the Maryland Community Health Resource Commission and the Maryland Consortium on Coordinated Community Supports. The views presented here are those of Brain Futures and not necessarily those of the Commission or Consortium. Please join us for all three conversations in the series as part of our work to strengthen youth executive function skills and improve mental health in Maryland Title I schools. Learn more at brainfutures.org.